entrepreneur, but it was not bad.
Hello and welcome to this very interesting conversation between myself, James Onen, and I'm also joined by Joel Bellenson. We're here to talk about the events of the past couple of days and the controversy surrounding remarks made by Kanye West. By now you know that he's been taken off of many social media platforms, although it appears that Twitter has reinstated its account because of Elon Musk taking over. Not too sure about that being the case. But also Adidas and Gap and many of Kanye West's business collaborators have since announced the termination of their contracts with Kanye West. So no longer will they be partnering in the creation and production and marketing of shoes and other clothing apparel related to the Yeezy brand. Kanye is having a rough time right now. Everyone either says he's a racist or that he has a mental illness or a little bit of both. And it sort of sparked conversations about the issue of anti-Semitism. Over the week, Western media publications were, expressing dismay at what they feel is the rise of anti-Semitism, that which they felt, I guess, had been in the decline. And now with Kanye West ranting, now all the white supremacists and Nazis are all cheering in celebration and are happy at the fact that they can ride on the coattails of Kanye to push their agenda, and that maybe more hate will be directed towards Jews and that this is a bad thing. Kanye West did raise some interesting points regarding Jews and how they conduct business and how they could be emulated. A lot of it was presented in a way that could easily be interpreted as hatred, and that is how most people understood it. Well, that's what we want to unpack today in this conversation that I'm having with Joel Bellenson. Hey, Joel, welcome to this talk that we're having right here in my office.
Here in Kampala, Uganda.
In Kampala, Uganda. Well, you speak very well. You mixed up a couple of Ugandan languages.
I mixed up Luganda and Chole, yeah.
Oh, yeah? So maybe you can start by telling us how long you've been in Uganda. And if you're watching this, yes, Uganda is where we are. We're recording this in Kampala, the capital of Uganda. And it might seem strange that Ugandans are, looking into Kanye West's comments. What does this have to do with us? But believe it or not, world, there are people in Uganda who are interested in things happening outside. And so here we are. Now, when did you first come to Uganda?
15 years ago.
15 years ago.
15 years ago when the Mabira forest riots happened.
Just remind us about those riots. For those who
government
don't
had gazetted part of the forest, the biggest forest, to be used for sugar plantations by an Indian sugar company. And there were large riots about it that cascaded into violence and death and further violence. And that was my first day setting foot in Kampala. And,
That was day one Kampala.
The day one Kampala 2007.
Mm-hmm. And what have you been doing here since? What's your reason for being in Uganda?
Well, I'm a scientist, engineer, entrepreneur. I had come to do animal testing on new drugs I had designed against malaria and sleeping sickness using artificial intelligence software. And we partnered with the Ministry of Health and Makerere University and International Livestock Research Institute. And so I was here to set up the animal testing.
Okay.
And then I ended up becoming an advisor on the President's Investment Roundtable for biotech. And then they kept on talking me into coming here. And
wow, it almost seems like Kanye West was right. Because look at you. What are you doing here in Uganda, messing around and, being involved in national policy and national development? I mean, it almost seems like it's true that, people of a particular persuasion, ethnic persuasion, find themselves entering into different communities and societies and taking over things. Is that what you're here to do?
I have no intention of conquest. The chief engineer at my first company was a Ugandan.
Okay.
We were the company that assembled and annotated the human genome. And Edward Chiruluta from Masaka was the chief engineer. And when Merck Pharmaceuticals bought us, he became the worldwide director of research IT for Merck.
So, where are you from? You are American.
I'm American, born in Los Angeles, California, about half an hour from Hollywood, half an hour from the beach.
Okay, and these days it's not enough to simply ask if someone is American. We kind of want to go a step further to ask, okay, what kind of American are you? Nowadays, there's all kinds of conversations about how people identify and their ethnic heritage and so forth. So how would you describe yourself? What's your background?
I guess I'm also Canadian, so I'm Amer Ugandan.
Did you say Ugandan?
Yes.
Ugandan.
I'm a Ugandan.
What's a Ugandan?
I don't know. I've just invented the word. It just sounded cool. So I'm
All right,
Canadian, American, Jewish, and Ugandan.
Okay. So, and I think this is why this conversation I feel is going to be very interesting. And it's why I invited you here. Being a person of part Jewish heritage and part Jewish background, someone like you would probably be sensitive to issues related to anti-Semitism, hostile attitudes towards Jews.
Actually, both sides of my family are Jewish.
Okay.
As far as we know, going back thousands of years. So
right.
Yeah, and the places that are at war right now are where part of my family lived, both in Ukraine and Russia.
So how do you feel as a person of Jewish background, knowing how much Jewish people have suffered through history, being persecuted in many, many countries, being chased away from countries, throughout history, thousands of years going back, being chased out of your own home, and being away from that home for 1,000 years, and then not until 1948 having a state you can call your own. And then even then, there are still negative attitudes that persist. It's, of course, hard to forget how the Nazi regime in Germany treated Jews, about approximately 6 million executed for no crime, aside from the fact that they were Jewish. So when you hear Kanye West make the kinds of statements he made, do you feel that are you reminded of those kinds of negative attitudes that were exhibited, for example, during the Nazi era, where Jews were being blamed for all of the wrongs, they were being scapegoated for all of the wrongs happening in Europe and in Germany in particular? And in Kanye West's rants, he pointed to Jews as being responsible for much of the decadence we're seeing in the black community. Especially, he did specifically point out the hip-hop music, especially the hip-hop music that would glorify violence and drugs, and that it is the Jews making money off of that kind of dysfunction. He mentioned that. And at the same time, he was almost complimenting Jews in how good they seem to be with finance and how they should be emulated, how they tend to be nepotistic and how they stick together, and that how they seem to be in collusion to try to subvert the host cultures that they exhibit, to subvert black culture and so forth. But anyway, just putting that all together, do you feel as a person of Jewish descent targeted by the ideas that Kanye West has been sharing lately?
Well, I mean, as an individual, no. But as I understand this sense of collective fear of being collectively punished for whatever wrongdoings of powerful Jewish people, and being scapegoated for the wrongdoings of plenty of other powerful people who are not Jewish. And so I'm certainly sensitive to that. At the same time, I understand the history of all of this, and I've gone through my own evolution. As I've grown up, I went through a period of my own classic self-hating Jew period from university for about 30 years onwards, where I studied Arabic, I studied the Quran, and attended meetings in support of Palestinians against Israel. And
wow, that's interesting.
Oh, I went all the way down the rabbit hole.
Okay.
So I'm like, where a lot of the Jews who ended up in various organizations that are militantly pro-Palestinian or woke, quote unquote, on lots of issues. I was Mr. Wokester back in the 80s. I was a leader of the anti-apartheid movement at Stanford. I criticized Israel for the war in Lebanon.
So in other words, you're a standard liberal, secular Jew.
I was for...
Atheists?
Somewhat, yeah. I would say I'm a scientist, so there was this general there at that time I saw it as being in tension with one another. I've come to terms with it all, but I was more polarized back then. I was caught up in the polarization. I'd like to believe I've gotten past a lot of these polarizations and now just trying to make peace with the pendulum swinging in the world. And
So, according to Kanye West, the Jews control everything. He kept saying Jewish media, and that sort of has stoked the ire of many of the people responding to that. But it is true, isn't it, that Jews disproportionately are represented in the high positions when it comes to Western, global corporate news media, when it comes to entertainment media, the entertainment companies, the film studios, the music
film
labels,
studios, music, definitely, comic books.
So in other words, in almost everything as it pertains to culture and entertainment and ideas, it seems like there are Jewish people involved in running those institutions.
Well, in many cases, they founded them. I mean,
Okay.
the main studios in Hollywood were founded by Jews who fled Nazi Germany.
Now, why is it a controversial thing to simply acknowledge that? Let's start there. To simply acknowledge the fact that there is an overrepresentation of people of Jewish heritage in those fields, such as media.
Well, I think we're dealing with a situation where, like how black people get offended if non-blacks use the N-word, but blacks can use it among themselves. Jews do the same. They'll acknowledge and be proud of Jewish success in various industries, but we don't want anyone else to say it. I think Jewish people in general, we are suffering an identity crisis right now.
Okay, so explain to me what that identity crisis entails, given what Kanye West said, saying how Jews are overly represented in these areas, which is acknowledged by not just Jews, although you said Jews would prefer to acknowledge it privately. So why would it be a problem for it to be looked at as an issue that could start a conversation about how this might affect the cultural direction of a country? I mean, and because
it's ultimately a political question, right? I mean, yes, culture is upstream of politics, and the politics is now very polarized, and Jews in America are split roughly 75% Democrat, 25% Republican or independent. And so that's the current, that's been the split pretty much probably since Roosevelt, within some range between 20 to 30% non-Democrat and the other being Democrat. So Kanye West supported Trump. And so
Famously.
that angered a lot of a lot of Democrats of every type, white, Jewish, black, Latino, period. In a lot of ways, people are more loyal to their party than even to religion. So I think that's part of the story here. I think Jews are split on multiple fronts. I think I've articulated to you at least 3 splits that I think are significant that were present also during the 1930s and 40s. The split between globalism and particularism, the split between the religious and the secular, and the split between the free market oriented and the statist oriented.
or the communists.
Yes, the statist communist types.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
like the Jews in Germany were caught between those two forces. They were hated on one side for being capitalist pigs, and they were hated on the other side for being communist agents. So they were in both cases seen as
because
enemy forces.
because they were sort of leading the charge on both ideologies, I guess it was easy for anyone to take their pick or to just point at them as the scapegoat for any number of issues, because whatever issue was an issue, you'd look there and there'd probably be a Jewish person of prominence sort
that
of
you can cite.
that you could easily cite as being the one, or I should say, being the most easily identifiable spearhead of that.
In a way, this is a civil war among Jews. That's really what we're seeing. And we've seen it on a peaceful level.
Well, it's been a long civil war.
Well, it's periodic. I mean, like in Israel, right now they've had 5 elections in 3 years, and there are all kinds of bitter disputes among Jews in Israel. And there was similarly in the 30s and 40s in Israel or pre-Israel.
That's something that's not widely discussed. I think the world doesn't generally pay as much attention to domestic Israeli politics. We don't even know so much about the different factions. What we do know is that all parties seem fiercely nationalistic, understandably so. And isn't it mostly right-wing parties that have carried sway?
So in Israel, it's the inverse of the U.S. situation, where the 75% of American Jews are liberal, 75% of Israeli Jews are conservative.
And this is very interesting, which is why American conservative Jews tend to be the ones that are wearing the hats.
They're wearing the yarmulkes. They're more religious.
Is that what it's called, a yarmulke?
A yarmulke or kippah.
Yeah, you don't normally see that with a lot of the more liberal.
That's right. Well,
there you go.
My Jufro didn't carry my yarmulke well, and now that I'm bald, I don't carry a yarmulke well.
Okay, so now, in my opinion, just because a particular group is overrepresented in an industry isn't bad in and of itself, and I don't see anything wrong with it. Why, in your opinion, do you think it is that someone like Kanye West and other people of a right-wing persuasion would take issue with what they feel this Jewish minority is doing in their societies?
Sure. Well, again,
what is the issue in contention?
Well, again, we're dealing with, it's a political split, and Jews are very articulate on whatever position they're advocating. So you have, with Kanye West and Candace Owens, one of their big issues is abortion. Mm-hmm. And Jewish women and men are probably, I don't know the numbers, but I'm sure they're disproportionately active in the pro-choice movement. Jews are 2% or less than 2% of the American population, and I'm pretty positive that more than 2% of the activists pro-choice and a lot of other liberal movements have Jews at the forefront. As writers, as speakers, as artistry creators.
Many famous feminist activists are of Jewish background.
Gloria
right?
Steinem, and goes on and on and on. It's just people don't know it, but we're a matrilineal culture. You're only a Jew if your mother's a Jew.
Okay.
It's the opposite of African tribes.
That's very interesting.
Aside from the Ghanaians. The Ghanaians also are like the Jews. They trace through the mother. But very few other African tribes trace lineage through the mother. So even though you always hear about these patriarchs, quietly, the women really run Jewish society. And the core of it was the mikveh, where they would go to bleed once a month. Right? They'd go have their period
Might this
together.
might this explain why a lot of Western people of Jewish background tend to lean liberal, and why especially the men, a lot of the men over there are liberal too, because of that matrilineal aspect. Perhaps have the men become, what's the best word to use, feminized, I could say, and that is why they sort of mostly support such progressive policies.
I don't know if feminized would be the right word, but they've learned not to be threatened by women's power.
They're used to it. It's a normal thing.
We're accustomed to dealing with it. And the women do defer to logic, and we it's a culture very much based on argument and debate. Mm-hmm. They say put 2 Jews in the room, there will be at least 3 opinions. I mean, so we love to argue. It's really kind of the essence of being a Jew, is to argue things. And we almost don't respect each other if you can't argue your enemy's point of view as well as they can.
All right.
It's like argument, questioning. It's like built into who we are. Yisrael, right? The story, Jacob fights an angel of God, gets renamed Yisrael. It means literally God wrestler. So, so it's like so much of who
he
we
had
are.
the goal to even argue with God.
Yeah, exactly. And then even when we celebrate Passover, right? Passover is the liberation from African slavery, right? And there's this big moment in the Seder, the Jewish service, where we ask the 4 questions. And it's supposed to be like the youngest or stupidest or the visitor. They're supposed to ask in the most disrespectful tone possible, just a gigantic 4 WTFs. And
I just thought of something funny. Like typically a lot of Africans, for example, believe that Egypt was a purely African sort of Negroid kingdom of black-skinned people. And if we are to believe the story about how the Jews were enslaved, it would mean that thousands of years ago, Africans were enslaving Jews.
That seems pretty clear.
So I wonder if...
Moses' wife was black.
That too.
Yeah.
I wonder if acknowledging
his kids would have looked like Lisa Bonet or Lenny Kravitz, right?
Yeah.
That's would have been Moses' kids. Would have been Lenny Kravitz, Lisa Bonet, strolling into Israel,
Well, they could have used rock and roll at, Mount Sinai.
They would have needed it. We need a serious laser show.
The thing is, a lot of blacks in America are quick to make it seem like it's just whites that have been the oppressors and the tormentors. So, and I like to take the view that humanity is flawed, and all throughout history, any society that's had the ability to take advantage of another has done so. And the recent Woman King movie stoked discussions about, the role of Africans in the transatlantic slave trade, which previously was never even talked about. And I'm actually glad that there was a movement to try to get the movie canceled or to encourage people to boycott the film. The film seems to have done well, and if it's a good film, it should. But I'm glad that it created that conversation about slavery and the role of Africans.
Everybody has conquered somebody at
exactly.
some point in their history. I mean, look, black people conquered Africa. The Bantu came from Cameroon, and they systematically conquered the continent.
I mean...
and the North Africans conquered most of Asia, right?
I keep telling this to my friends. Every time you hear the phrase African kingdom, in that phrase is contained genocide, displacement, rape, pillaging, slavery, killing, and slavery. Kingdoms aren't like amusement parks.
The Ghanaian kingdom was a gold slave kingdom.
Kingdom means someone looks at another person's land and says, I want it. And another person's woman and says, I want her. So it's not as though a kingdom is this grand, majestic...
Well, they try to portray it in the end as like some sort of confederation of landowners,
right?
So it's
like Wakanda.
Well, it's like the landed gentry formed, a democratic body and chose their leader, and maybe who knows? I mean, humanity's has all kinds of structures. And,
but just to go back to Kanye West now for a minute, and the issues he raised about the Jews. All right, I'm just going to summarize for you my understanding of Kanye West's frustrations, and you can tell me if there seems to be some merit to it, and it is really the topic of this video. Finally, we're getting to it. So Kanye is looking at the way the media in America controls public discourse, which it does. No one would dispute that the media sets the agendas. The media creates the frame of the conversation. And the media influences opinions. Now, if one were to scrutinize the way the media frames issues and the kinds of opinions that they promote and the kinds of opinions that they try their best to suppress, it seems clear to most people that there is a left-wing persuasion amongst most media individuals. And even when you look at, say, either voting records or or how some journalists would self-describe politically, or who they donate to the most. I think it's objectively verifiable that American news media is left-wing. And so they will be pushing mostly left-wing ideas. Now, Kanye West, being a person that is opposed to many left-wing policies, including on issues like abortion and on issues such as, I'm not sure about Kanye West's economic views, but on the issue of promoting LGBT agendas and so forth, environmentalism and so forth, you can see the media is on board with that. Now, if I were a person of a conservative persuasion, wouldn't I be correct in viewing the media as being united in their opposition against my interests? And then if I so happen to look at the composition of who owns these media outlets, and I notice that the owners and the top personnel predominantly are of a particular ethnic persuasion, it would seem like Kanye West is 100% correct in calling it a Jewish media. Why is that controversial?
Well, I mean, not all the media is Jewish. I mean, Disney is not a Jewish company. I don't think HBO is a Jewish company. Gannon is not a Jewish company.
Who's the CEO of Disney?
The CEO perhaps could be Jewish, but the ownership is not. So the stockholders are not predominantly Jewish at all.
Well, who makes the decisions? It's the
shareholders in the end, right? The shareholders fire executives that they don't like.
All right. So what about when you look at the media in general? I've seen charts being circulated on social media that show, for example, the top, like the editors at the major newspapers, American newspapers, and reporters. A lot of them are of Jewish persuasion.
Definitely. Well, I mean, there's a lot of Jewish doctors, a lot of Jewish lawyers, scientists, accountants.
Right.
We tend to be like overrepresented 10-1 in the U.S.
Okay. So. Now, unlike, say, the medical profession or the legal profession, the media profession is unique in the sense that it is probably, of all professions, the one that impacts politics the most.
Well, you could say the military does.
But you know what I mean. Okay, like in terms of mindset. In terms of influencing mindset, would you agree? And if it does appear that this particular group of people of a particular ethnic background are...
Well, they're not the only ones. I mean, yes, they're overrepresented relative to their less than 2% of the U.S. population, right? And they may be 10 or even 15-fold overrepresented compared to their population. They might be 20 or 30% of media, of finance, of medicine, of technology.
But So putting aside the issue of how overrepresented they may be in other fields, and I'm quite happy to accept the reasons for that. I do acknowledge.
Well, I was more pointing out that they're not the only ones running the show. I'm saying, yeah, they have influence, but they're not the only ones.
So when you hear people like Kanye, so when Kanye speaks of a Jewish media, and you notice that there's a lot of, or at least his ideas seem to be resonating with people. It seems to align with a fairly popular sentiment amongst a particular segment of Western society. Do you think such an impression is unfounded? And if what you're saying is true, that actually behind the scenes the actual owners are not Jews, would that be cause for people to not, or to dispel the notion that Jews are running things?
Well, if Jews are the henchmen for powerful people, then they still are going to be targets, right? And I think that was one of the cases in Central Europe, that Jews couldn't own land, but they became tax collectors for the Polish nobility and landlords. Mm-hmm. So they did the dirty work on behalf of the blue-blooded wealthy people who owned stuff for centuries. So Jews have found themselves or risen to be important at formulating policies, articulating them, and implementing on that maybe still are being driven by WASP Americans, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Americans, the old money, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts.
Just so that I understand your perspective, in other words, for those who would subscribe to the idea or conspiracy or whatever, that Jews are behind the strings, the scenes pulling strings. Your point is that actually, in fact, if they are doing so, they would be doing so at the behest of another group of powerful people who you're saying are not Jewish.
Correct. The Morgan Stanleys, the DuPonts and Rockefellers and Fords, many of which were anti-Semites themselves.
So how does this partnership work exactly? Why would a Rockefeller or a DuPont or a Morgan Stanley align themselves with?
Why would they leverage Jewish intellectual labor? Well, Jews are super literate. We've had 4,000 years of literacy.
Okay, so
we're really good at it.
All right. So I guess it would be mostly people of a conservative political persuasion that would decry the Jewish influence in Western corporate media. And my question is, if you believe that it is other people in power that are simply utilizing the intellect and of the Jews in order to do this work, to push these agendas, how would it be of interest to them? Because what a conservative would say is that it's one thing to say that the media is being controlled by Jews. The issue isn't that. The issue is that it's that they feel that they are abusing the power they have in trying to subvert the culture of the countries that they happen to be living in. So if you look at a lot of the way LGBT issues, trans issues are just amplified so loudly across the media. And if you look at a lot of the publications that decry or I should say stoke racial tensions by pointing out how white people are so bad, or about how black people have it so bad also, then a lot of people feel that, hey, perhaps there is a concerted effort by this self-interested tribal group that might want to subvert this culture in trying to promote decadence and immorality by way of, let's say, the kinds of music that we've been seeing released by the major record labels that are owned by Jews. By the kind of media that we are seeing that would promote some of these left-wing or super progressive ideas, woke agendas. And then what else? Pornography and so forth. And then on top of that, finally, the media that frames the conversations around these issues. Some of them say, yeah, this tells us that these people don't like us and want to subvert our culture. What would you say to people who think that? And if your retort is that actually they do so at the behest of other people who happen to not be Jewish, why would those non-Jewish owners of these corporations and businesses do that?
Okay, so the first part I would say is, as we mentioned, Jews are also very influential in conservative media. So it's just in terms of a talent base, they seem to have talent at media, period, whether they're left-wing or right-wing. And conservative Jews are pretty disgusted and horrified with Hollywood. So they are not on board with the decadence and all these other,
Although sadly they are a minority as compared to their secular liberal counterparts
in the U.S.
in America.
And
it is
Britain.
the American context that I'm most interested in exploring because of where the debate is currently raging.
Well, I guess what I'm thinking about globally, though, American Jews are approximately half of the world's Jews. The other half are Israelis. So if you have like a 75-25 split one way in the U.S. and you got a 75-25 split the other way in Israel, it's roughly Jews are evenly split when you look at it globally. Between a traditionalist versus this cosmopolitan, atomistic, individualistic empowerment, on the left and on the right, being more focused on tradition, family values.
I think you raise a very interesting point, and I wonder if it may paint a picture of a particular kind of mindset of a typical secular liberal Western Jew. You know, the globalist versus the what was the other one?
Particularist, I think, was a way to refer to it. You can call it tribalist, but the general versus the particular. So the globalist.
Exactly. So for example, for a person that would be more conservative or right wing or even white nationalist, these are people that would champion sort of
particularism.
That we are special. Our culture is special. We would like to preserve it. We would like to maintain some.
And conservative Jews are on board with that.
And we feel that we ought to remain a majority in our country, or things of that nature, which if you were previously a majority in your country, you would think that's what you would want. I don't think, for example, we're in Uganda, right? I don't think a Ugandan would be okay with the idea of, at one point in time, people from Congo flooding into Uganda and becoming a large enough political force that they can influence policy. I think most Ugandans would not be okay with that. Most Ugandans would say, hey, wait a minute. This is Uganda. We'd like to keep Uganda as the Uganda we know. So I'm quite partial to and sympathetic to the sentiments of those in Western countries who would want to preserve aspects of their heritage, as Israelis do for their country. I mean, they declare themselves, Israel, to be a Jewish nation, a homeland for Jews, and that's a wonderful thing, and I wish them luck in their aspirations. However, this is a privilege that seems to be denied in Western nations, mostly courtesy of the Jews, the Jewish people that are in the media, who are constantly chastising and decrying these conservatives or nationalists or white nationalists. They take every opportunity to paint these people in the worst light possible, and yet, to me as a Ugandan, I feel like these sentiments are reasonable. I mean, they're not saying, we don't want blacks in our schools or we don't want blacks in our churches. They're saying we would like to control how many people come into our country and into our communities. To me, these are reasonable sentiments. And the fact that there tends to be a tendency to demonize these ideas, mostly coming from the media and academia and other power structures that are highly populated by this minority of people that are quite easy to identify. And I think this is what stokes some of the resentments among people of right-leaning, conservative, nationalistic inclination.
Well, globalization has deindustrialized the U.S. Right? Factories moved offshore. People lost jobs. It broke families, that broke communities. That really started in earnest in the 70s and 80s. And it's been devastating to have, the globalization of labor. And
so if you were is it that the mindset of a secular Jewish, Western secular Jewish person is the mindset of a globalist? In other words, a person who might feel uprooted from his own, I don't know what I might call Israel for these people. I don't know how much they identify with Israel, but technically it would be their homeland. That is where their people originate from, and yet they don't have such a strong affinity to that country. And a lot of these people have spent the last several centuries as the
wandering Jew,
wandering
Jews,
wandering
across.
There's
a plant named after us,
Western countries, going to America,
nomadic gypsies. That's what we've been.
And I wonder if for them they feel as though America is that for them, a home, or rather is America simply a geographical location?
So I think
to which they do not attach great sentimental and spiritual attachment.
So I think when we talk about any group of people, we're going to have to talk about them, in my opinion, generationally. That generations that come at different stages have different views. Like my father was the son of an immigrant who fled Russia. My father was a militantly patriotic American. militantly, just and believed in preserving American culture. And he would fight for that. He flew the largest American flag in the neighborhood over our house. And he served in the U.S. Navy. So then I come along, my generation, me and my sister, were the baby boomer, liberal, Gen X, unraveling generation.
Hippie.
Yeah, my older sister was a hippie, a flower child, whereas my dad was incredibly conservative and, very modest, dressed modestly, drove a modest car, never did anything to display any signs of wealth. He was constantly criticizing the younger generation of Jews that would show off. That's the nouveau riche, and he was just filled with contempt for conspicuous consumption. And so I think there's that generational cycle. I mean, I think we see that with African immigrants to the U.S. They're hardworking, nose to the grindstone, disciplined, family values, very conservative. I mean, we've no doubt heard all these anecdotes of Nigerian Americans who supported Trump, and just plenty of Asian Americans supported Trump. So I think you have that first generation or two of immigrants that become more patriotic than the people who even lived in that country. I mean, many people joke about the fact that I know more about Ugandan history and culture than many Ugandans do, because I'm an immigrant here and I've taken it seriously that I have to try to assimilate and fit in somehow. And so I'll be cursed probably with children who are rebels, but I think that's just how it goes.
So how do we fix the problem? And so, because look, it's one thing, even if you're to take at face value the warnings of the media about how there's so much anti-Semitism being stoked by ideas such as Kanye's. Okay, so what's the solution they're proposing? If there are such, if you believe that these ideas are highly, highly anti-Semitic and that there are many people who hold such views, okay, so what's the plan to address those views? I feel like there doesn't even seem to be a willingness to have a conversation about it, and as I understand,
everybody's talking past each other.
Yeah, exactly. So, as far as I'm concerned, Kanye was trying to start the conversation, but each time he tries to advance the conversation, either people cower down, or people call him a Jew hater, or people call him a Nazi, or people say he's channeling Hitler. And
he also
so
likes getting attention, so that's part of the problem.
I understand that.
And he's got Jewish men messing with women in his life. So that can't make him happy either. So, I feel bad for the guy. So I like to make, the he's a brilliant artist and he's got the bipolarity that many brilliant people have. So
that is true. And but nonetheless, whether he was trolling or attention seeking, he has gotten a conversation started, and I feel like it's a long overdue conversation. I kind of feel that way as it applies to, let's say, in Rwanda, our neighboring country, where
they can't talk about the genocide.
They can't talk about the genocide.
Any other language.
Exactly, and they can't discuss their tribal grievances.
And it's because of fear.
And it's because of fear.
Fear prevents the rational discussion.
But the thing is, I don't feel like, all I feel that they've done is to put essentially, I feel like it's like a pressure cooker. All you're doing is allowing the sentiments and resentments.
You're deferring the conflict
to a future date.
Yeah. So I have the freedom to have this conversation with you because I'm not feeling the terror that I don't know, it could be over dramatization for all I know, but the Jews that I encounter on Twitter and Facebook are freaked out.
But are they really? I feel
that's the question. Is it performative?
I feel like it's performative outrage, to be honest. I feel like
in general that's been the left has been a hell of a lot of performative outrage on every issue of every nationality, black, Jewish, gay, you name it, women, everybody's putting on a show. They just have
to turn everything up.
Well,
they have to dial everything up to 11.
The more of a victim you are, the more legitimacy you have.
So in other words, scream as loud as you can to shut the other person down and hope the issue goes away. Seems to be the
That's
mindset.
that. Yeah, although it's not very effective. So it's in some ways it's masturbation. People are just wanting.
Well,
to,
you get patted on the back. Everyone calls you a hero.
Yeah, you get to consolidate your position of within your own tribal hierarchy by being really loud and ruthless towards your political enemies.
But you see, how does that solve the problem? So
It doesn't.
If, for example, you were tasked with trying to assuage the anxieties of the likes of Kanye regarding the roles of Jews in media or entertainment, how would you go about having that conversation, and how would you assuage those anxieties? How would you cool tensions?
He's already done what he needed to do. He bought Parler. He's going to be back on Twitter. I mean, he'll lose a whole bunch of endorsement. He'll get other supporters. In general, I tell people to just fight for whatever you believe in, and don't be such a wimp about it.
Yeah, but okay, so right now, I mean, if you go to Twitter and other places, I mean, people are still frothing at the mouth, just declaring
on every issue. That's Americans.
Okay, yeah. So as it pertains to
lunatics.
this specific issue, you see, what I'm trying to do and why I'm trying to have this conversation is to just seek a possible meeting of minds. I feel like there is a nuanced conversation to be had here. But unfortunately, all people sort of just run to the most extreme
it gets some attention.
Caricatures of each other's
it gets views.
ideas. And so there can never be a nuanced conversation. So here's what I took from what Kanye was saying. He basically spoke of his experiences with Jewish enterprise, Jewish media, in rather disparaging and negative terms, while at the same time expressing envy about how well Jews have done for themselves because of that tendency to either collude amongst themselves, as he would imply, or how they handle money, how they deal with contracts, and so forth. And to me, I saw a teaching moment there. To me, it felt like he was saying, hey guys, listen, there is this group of people who have done well for themselves because this is how they operate. So we as black people, in order to rise up, we also need to change the way that we operate. Now,
and that's true because Jews are a creed-based people. We're based on the Torah.
Yeah.
Right? So we actually have a moral code we're supposed to be operating on, and that's how we feel comfortable trusting each other. And I wish we saw black Americans have a moral code that they operated on where they could trust each other.
That is unfortunately missing, I would say, amongst black Americans. I feel like they're not self-interested enough.
Well, they're too pettily self-interested. They're looking to score personal points all the time, and they're willing to destroy each other while they do it. And hip hop and rap music was all about outsized egos.
Okay, so of course, as you know, there are black, and even here in this instance, certain black leaders do point to their finger at Jewish activist type people, liberal, political apparatchiks, essentially manipulating and dividing blacks in order to obtain the vote. So in other words,
everybody's trying to divide each other, right? People are trying to divide the Jews against each other. Everybody's trying to play divide. I mean, that's politics. Okay. That's just how the game works. You try to use somebody else's group to articulate the view that you want and sow dissension in their ranks. I mean, that's.
But don't you think? Okay, so in the case of blacks, yeah. So we've got. Here's my opinion, and clearly by now, if you're watching this, you can tell that if I had to be gauged politically, my inclinations lean more conservative, right wing. But I do feel as though by stoking racial tensions in an effort to engender or affinity among black voters, I feel that such an approach really causes irreparable harm to the fabric of American society, where blacks ought to be feeling positive about their ascension in American society and how much better they are doing.
Well, that's in a way what what Kanye was trying to do with the White Lives Matter t-shirt.
They're being told to constantly feel resentful,
yes,
and upset about their condition. And if that is being done only in order to garner votes for a particular political party, I feel that is extremely unfortunate. If there are genuine and legitimate grievances to be discussed, I think they should. But I feel like there is a political side in America that wants to make that conversation impossible and to just constantly make black people hate.
Definitely.
White people.
I went to school with the guy who wrote the playbook on it, Steve Phillips. He was the chairman of the Black Student Union, and he wrote a book about America's emerging democratic majority. And he was formulating that thesis when we were students together, and his view was just unite everybody against whitey. And, you're straight whitey. Basically get the gays, the women, blacks, Latinos, and everybody would unite against the...
I feel like isn't that so opportunistic, though, and ultimately just self-destructive?
I thought it was, and I told him back then that I thought he should be looking at people in a more nuanced way based on class, based on, philosophy, that if you take any group of people, there's going to be a normal distribution. A quarter are going to be right-wing, a quarter are going to be left-wing, 50% are going to be somewhere in the middle.
I feel like that's a healthy thing, and I would celebrate political diversity because each side gets to check each other, but I would prefer in a respectful way rather than what it seems to be in America where there's just so much hatred.
Well, it's because we've lost our purpose in life. Americans have become so individualistic. Communities have been destroyed. Everybody's living atomistically. They can't hold on to relationships romantically
just
or their
put your
families.
Mic in front of you like this. Just turn it that way. Turn it. Yeah, like that.
Okay.
Yeah, go.
So people feel very lonely. There's a huge amount of loneliness in the Western world. And that loneliness and exhaustion. People are overworked, doing perhaps pointless jobs. And
shouldn't that call for a return to traditional values?
I think it's happening. I think it's happening across the board. And I think a lot of the left-wing meltdown is them wanting to find a holy cause. They're desperate for a holy cause, and they've turned the state into their god. So they believe in the state. And the state is dad, the state is the all-father, and that's their religion. And so even though they would claim to be atheists, they are actually religious fanatics.
Religious fanatics who view that their role in the world as being one to fix it, to fix everything. And so they want to harness the power of the state.
As long as they're in it. That's the
as
biggest
long as they're
fear.
In charge of it.
Once they lose power, the revolution eats its young,
Right. That's why they're so obsessed with power.
And that's why they're so obsessed with being loud. You have to prove that you're more fanatical than the next guy and to earn your position in the hierarchy based on your passion. And so they're intently trying, because if you're thrown out of that power structure, then you're going to, you'll be targeted by it. So this monster that you helped to create then will eat you later. So you kind of have to become ever louder and more frantic, pushing the power of this force. I mean, in a way, you saw that even with ISIS, with their just cartoonish villainy videos, and it was clearly designed to drive recruitment. Yes. And to show their place in the pantheon of angry Muslim people. And so it's like they're almost like compelled to be ever more fierce because of the machine that they've unleashed. If it ever decides that they're not, that they're an apostate, that they're a heretic, then they're going to get killed by the same monster that they built up.
You see that all the time. I mean, if you look at, even like Japan in the past, whether like World War II backwards, there's this tendency for a lot of the males in authority to be like super loud and super aggressive and super like just fanatical in their expression of dedication and devotion to their mission. And I think they do that because they want to make sure no one wavers, or at least to ensure compliance by everyone who would feel intimidated by that display of devotion.
Well, I mean, you're having people risking their careers, twitting and whatever away all day. And, if they lose momentum, the war starts to go against them. So it's almost like, that front line has to be going so hard, and they have to fear that their people behind them are going to shoot them.
But why would
if they don't keep on firing harder and harder at the enemy? Because I mean that goes on in every army, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
And Napoleon had to have people ready to kill his people if they didn't have the guts.
Yeah.
I mean, they've done all these studies that an average person, when they're put into a war situation, rather run and hide. So they almost have to have this fear that if you lose resolve, you're going to get killed. And so I think that happens in these movements. Progressive or conservative.
And would that be why they mostly liberal left-wing types seem to be the most against free speech? So you would think that if they felt that their ideas had value and were logical and sound and obvious to anyone with a modicum of intelligence, that they would enjoy their ideas being challenged.
They used to.
They would enjoy.
They used to be the champions of free
being
speech.
In debates.
I was a leftist when I was young because they wanted free speech. And the whole...
I was too.
Our mantra was, I will fight to my death your right to express what I find completely offensive.
Yeah, I fell in love with those sentiments too. And which is why I would say, at least as far as the early 2000s, I was very much... I would have described myself as a left-wing liberal person, at least
when I left America, I was a leftist. When I left after the Patriot Act, I was a leftist.
How could you not be? The Iraq War and all that?
And then I go to Canada, and I live in Canada 10 years, become a dual citizen. And with some distance, my attitude started to change. And then coming here, it changed even further. So the more I got out of the maelstrom of the left-right battle, I was starting to rethink things. And it gave me freedom. Distance gave me freedom to think differently.
But wouldn't you say you still hold to certain values of...
Yeah, I think I'm a traditional liberal, probably in some sort of Lockean sense or something like that.
I think many people are. And there's a popular phrase. They say, I didn't leave the left left me.
Yeah, I feel that way too. I mean, someone like Glenn Greenwald feels that way. Yes. Right? He was a leftist like me, anti-imperialist, and now...
Yeah, Dave Rubin, Bill Maher... constantly saying, hey, leftists, you're going a bit too far.
You've overreached. The pendulum has swung too far in one direction.
Exactly. And
now it's going to swing in the other. So I kind of came to that conclusion as I was leaving the U.S. for Canada, and as I lived there, I just kind of embraced the idea that it's an 80-year cycle. And it's 40 years of diversification, subversion, nonconformity, feminism, individualism, blah, blah, blah. And then it swings in the other direction. And I didn't imagine what it would look like to be in that moment of overreach where it just went too far.
And wouldn't that explain Kanye's extreme outburst? And I think he's hinted at the fact that he felt he had to go to the extreme lengths that he did because of how far things had swung the other way.
Well, also he was pretty full of himself, right? He thought he had so much freedom that he was so powerful now that he could say whatever he wanted.
Actually, no, I disagree. Because I've watched all of the interviews he's been on. And one prominent idea he's been sharing is he gave a very good example of how when a woman says to her husband, don't go to war, Kanye said she would be saying that to him because she's worried for the kids. Whereas when the husband insists that he is going to go to war, he would say he's doing that because of the kids.
So they're both justifying whatever their position is for the kids.
In other words, he clearly understands that the actions he's taking or the stances he's proclaiming can potentially ruin him in material terms and financial terms. But in terms of the future, he thinks this is a battle that needs to be fought. So he could be deluded for believing this, for sure. But he seems to think that it's an important enough conversation to kickstart that he's willing to stake his future on it. Now, right or wrong, you gotta you gotta admire that kind of tenacity and dedication. So that is why.
Well, I would say he was displaying what we call in Yiddish chutzpah, and when his chutzpah was, I am so big, I can say whatever the hell I want.
Do you honestly
Adidas
think
can't cancel me?
Wait, do you honestly believe he thought he'd get away with it? I don't think so. I think he knew he'd get shit for what he said. But
I think he was daring them. I think it was a test.
And they did it.
And I don't think he fully expected it.
Well, there's some
I think
people.
he was prepared for it somewhat.
There's some people arguing that he might have done this in order to free himself of the contracts that he'd been tied to.
It's a way to wipe the slate clean and just build his base. He'll get now a lot more white fans than he had before. And I'm sure it'll work out commercially just fine for him. And the advertisers who abandoned him.
He has enough FU money to get by.
Same as Musk, same as Trump. I mean, that's what these guys are about. They display the American dream that eventually you have enough wealth that you can say F you. Now, what we're learning is that there's a deep state. And I would say it's much deeper than Jews in media. I mean, the deep state is the think tanks, it's the military-industrial complex, it's the energy companies, it's there's a lot of major forces.
And that's all white people. That's
all
wasps. Who we would call wasps.
This is the old money. This is the Rockefellers, Fords, DuPonts. So the deep state still really runs the show, and this theater that goes on between left and right is really kind of scripted and tolerated to whatever extent the deep state can handle it. Now, these outlying dudes who've made their money from entertainment or technology that have some degree of latitude to say F you to the deep state, we're watching the deep state try to crush them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're in the midst of. It's a class struggle. And I don't think it's really about, Jews and anti-Semites. I think it's about the deep state versus kind of the Ayn Randian empowered individual who's self-actualized.
It's so funny. You will often hear many conservatives and people on the right, especially who would be of libertarian persuasion, celebrating and encouraging the aspect of individuality, and yet ultimately that can end up destroying the concept of a nation.
Yes, everything's in tension. Every philosophy has a contradiction in it.
Right. So libertarianism seems to be antithetical to the notion of, or at least it would seem to run counter to the interests of, let's say, a traditionalist or a nationalist who would want a country that reflects sort of the ethnic fabric of the founding.
Well, I think you're now starting to get to a deeper question that people are looking for clean ideologies that they can consistently apply. And in the end, people are just selfish animals, and they're going to use whatever justification, whatever ideology or religion they can cloak their own personal ambition or comfort with. So I think people are constantly hypocritical. I think, that's just the nature of human nature is hypocrisy. And we love to proclaim high-minded ideals, and a lot of us try to adhere to them and live up to them, but also conditions change, and what was noble in one situation might be seen as horrible in another, and so are there eternal values that are always going to be true in every situation? And and is our current understanding suddenly the pinnacle of all human understanding? And this gets to the destruction of statues and the denigration of heroes of the countries.
I just find that to be the
most
disgusting thing. It's like
Presentism. It's presentism. It's narcissism. It's saying whatever we currently believe to be good and true should be applied throughout history retrospectively. And we're going to judge every person in every era based on what we currently personally believe to be good and true today, which is, I think, just the height of narcissism.
I would agree. I'll tell you a funny story. So I used to be an atheist activist. I wouldn't say I was like anti-religion so much as wanting to share my ideas and hoping that religion would diminish. I think I was sold on the idea as propagated by the likes of Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins about how, if we remove religion, we would be ushering in a golden age of enlightenment.
Oh, yeah.
And, even as I was buying into that and swallowing it, I kept wondering, wait, I thought they tried this in France somewhere in the 1700s. What happened? How did we get from that to where we are now, to where we then started having temples of enlightenment and shrines and all kinds of funny things that were happening in France at the time? And then you had, and then I would always find myself, because at the time I was listening to a lot of debates between Christian and atheist philosophers. And one of the questions atheists always struggled to answer was the issue of the atrocities of the atheistic regimes that were the communist regimes. And in response to, because the atheists would say, eradicate religion because violence and death and suffering. And then the Christian philosopher or theologian would respond by saying, well, let's look at history.
Without religion, there is no moral code, and we resort to barbarism.
There is that. Plus, if you look at the regimes that perpetuated the greatest mass murder in history, they were all explicitly atheistic. So I found that the atheists struggled to make the case for how lack of religion would result to peace and less killing and less violence. And that always kind of stuck with me. And when I look at where we are today, because I've long since abandoned sort of atheist activism, because at some point, somewhere around 2010, 2011, the atheist movement, as they were called, on the internet at least, they got taken over by radical leftists and progressives and feminists who wanted to make it about that agenda. And they wanted to turn us into a vehicle through which they can propagate their political ideas. And so there was a split that occurred within the online atheist community stemming from a scandal called Elevator Gate. Now, we're going into territory that I don't know if a lot of people are familiar.
No, I'm not familiar with this
But
one.
anyway, so what happened is, you know who Richard Dawkins is?
Oh, yeah, I've met him.
So you met him?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, that's great.
I mean, I did the human genome.
Right.
I'm the one who assembled and annotated the human genome.
Wait a second. Say that again for people who are watching.
So my company, Pangea Systems, Double Twist,
Yes.
we were the first to assemble and annotate the human genome, and that is my connection to Uganda.
Just
Because
a
our
minute. I
chief
thought the
engineer
human
was-
genome was sequenced by Craig Venter.
We beat him by 6 months. And so we took the public data and we assembled all the fragments. And it was a Ugandan who was the chief engineer.
How come I'm hearing this for the first time?
That a Ugandan was the chief engineer?
Yes. And who is this Ugandan?
His name is Edward Chiriluta, and he is such a shy, humble guy who hates the spotlight. He hates dealing with media. He doesn't want to be elevated up as a role model, and yet he's like the perfect guy. And he's so hardworking, so attentive to every little detail. And he was our chief engineer, and his 5-person team, I think we only even put $5 million on his project because we had many projects going on in the company. And that team beat Venter, who had $1 billion, and there was at least a dozen other companies that had $1 billion each.
Why? But wait, when I Google human genome sequencing, the names that pop up are Venter, and maybe there's another one. I don't know if it's Collins or someone.
Well, you can do a search on our big announcement. It got covered worldwide, but it's hard to find it. BBC, I think they had a title like Genome Dark Horse Comes to the Fore. Talk about racism. But anyways.
So the Ugandan was the dark horse.
Well, and Dexter Smith, my co-founder, he's a Black American.
Okay. So this is very interesting.
And we were kind of the woke multiracial company. Right. So,
But clearly, your hiring practices were meritocratic, it would seem.
yeah, I just wanted to get the best people.
Okay, so it was under those auspices that you met Richard Dawkins. Well, that's really cool. He's a nice fella. I only ever spoke to him on television. I was involved in a television sort of panel discussion on Al Jazeera, and he was the main guest. And then they had us.
He gave a lecture at Stanford when his book The Selfish Gene came out.
But that's like 70s, right?
The 80s, yeah. Well, it was the 80s when he came to Stanford and spoke.
And you saw him then?
Yeah. And I confronted him on it because my view was more looking at cellular molecular physiology as a choreography of molecular behavior that was influenced heavily by the context of environment.
That's amazing.
And so that's what I ended up building a lot of my company's products around. We did gene expression, protein expression, all of which looking at how the organism responds to the environment and how the genes get turned on or off by nurture. So it's, instead of nature versus nurture, nurture turns on or off nature, and which is a view that wasn't commonly expressed. It's still relatively rare.
Is that what is called epigenetics?
Exactly.
I kind of that to me makes most sense because I think at best, a genetic code will ascribe you with a particular predisposition, and depending on your environment, it may allow you to maximize.
That's right.
That predisposition. So if you're predisposed to be tall, providing you're in the right environment and eat well, then you will grow tall. But if you're raised in an environment where you're deprived of sufficient nutrition, then you maybe will not actualize your maximum genetic potential.
Or just whatever the dynamic could be. You didn't interact with the right person that triggered you going on a certain life path.
I know, right? It's quite interesting.
So I rebelled against genetic determinism, and then I built all these software systems that allowed the data to display that truth.
Well, that's very interesting, and perhaps we'll have to do another conversation where we're exploring some of the research that you've done. Back to Dawkins. He was embroiled in a scandal in 2011 in which he essentially, you could say, brushed off a complaint that was made by a feminist activist atheist who was participating in some sort of event called Rebecca Watson, and so she described an encounter with a man in an elevator at a conference, at the hotel where a conference was being held. And the man seemed to have taken a liking to her and requested her to join her in his room for a drink, a nightcap, which apparently she declined. And he went off his merry way. He tried to get laid, he tried to score and failed, and he moved on, got on with his life. And so she put out a video explaining how she felt quite unsafe in the elevator with this man as he was propositioning and was trying to encourage men to not do it. And then sort of other prominent voices in the space try to show her support and saying there's so much sexism in the atheism movement and so forth. And Dawkins, in some comment section, just came out and said, oh my gosh. She basically posted a comment in which she was trying to minimize this experience and brushing it off like, oh my gosh, this is just some Western privileged feminist BS. What? Oh my, there's probably a woman being decapitated in a Muslim country, and here you are complaining that a man politely asked you for a drink in an elevator and he declined, you declined, and he went off his way, and you're complaining? Like, come on, there's bigger issues. Anyway, so that turned into a huge scandal, and then the progressives just essentially ran roughshod over the atheist movement, took over it, and just tried to turn it into a progressive left-wing movement. And for me, that was my moment of awakening, where I noticed that these people that I was previously aligned with were very opposed to the idea of open discussion, even of sensitive issues. I noticed that they became very heavily involved in wanting to push political agendas. So I kind of moved away from sort of atheism, like atheism activism, or as it was called. So when you earlier mentioned how a lot of people are lonely and feel like they have no purpose, you know, even as we have been busy trying to bash religion and trying to promote secularism and atheism, the one thing we forgot to account for was the fact that by nature we are religious animals. Interpret religious any way you want, but essentially we seem to have a craving in our being to want to connect to a higher purpose.
Where did we come from? Where are we going? What's the point of all of this?
Right,
How should
and it
we
is
behave?
an integral part of the human experience. And our atheist thinkers and philosophers just didn't think about that. They just thought, hey, science, and we're good. But in the absence of religion,
I would argue that the scientists themselves, in many cases, are their own form of a new religion.
That's my point. So essentially, in the absence of what you would call traditional or theistic religion, essentially, political idealism became the next religion.
And
politics became their religion, and the state became their religion.
And the academia became the churches.
Exactly, which they are now.
And the professors are the preachers.
Thank you. And just like the preachers, they are infallible. They are the prophets of God. They cannot be argued with. And
they send the youth out militantly with fierce anger,
teaching the youth to hate the opposite gender,
and the apostates,
to
and the
hate
heretics.
their country, to hate. Like, I can't think of a more poisonous idea to propagate, and it makes me even.
Well, but it fit though with America. It fit well for a period with the American Empire's overall agenda. I mean, the American Empire rules a pretty large chunk of the world. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe you could say it's not as harsh. It's it's a less.
But I understand. Yeah, basically we were
preponderance, hegemony.
They were, yes,
American hegemony. The Pax Americana, mm-hmm. And the Pax Americana has brain drained the world and brought the most talented people from everywhere to become part of America. Right? And so to have America amass that human intellectual capital, it had to open up a lot of narrow-mindedness among perhaps the majority population that didn't want to have, the brains of Latin America and Asia and Africa and the Middle East become Americans. But yet the American imperial logic needed it, because otherwise how can you effectively influence without having to have brutal occupation and force everywhere, without having an educated collection of faces from these countries that can then, and we feel it here, right? The Ugandan and African diaspora has a tremendous influence here. Mm-hmm. And it's how America projects its soft power. Mm-hmm. And so there is a huge geopolitical, geoeconomic logic to all of this. So we can try to blame particular actors within it, the media, the academia, what have you, but to function as a global empire, this was how they chose to do it. Now, Chinese empire operates differently, right? It's straight up Han chauvinism, right? They're not trying to bring Africans into the Chinese Communist Party. They're not bringing Latin Americans into it. They have allies, but they're not like part of it. They're not making them into Chinese citizens. So the American strategy was more of co-optation, kind of the way the Baganda kingdom works, that anybody who displays Baganda culture, speaks Luganda, eats the food, wears the clothes, you're effectively a Baganda, right? So it's what would you call that? It's a kind of a cultural imperialism.
Pax Romana.
So this is the American, cultural imperialism, where it welcomes people of every color, every creed to become an American, because it's valuable to be able to to organize the world economy and in geopolitics, having representation from all over the world. Now, not every empire is operated that way, but that's how the American empire has chosen to work. Wow. And so, do you blame the Jews for that, or is that kind of, something much deeper than the Jews? I lean towards the latter, that this is just how America, how it tries to rule the world. Russia does it through the Russian language and the Orthodox Church.
I guess it's just the cycle of empire. The British did it, and before that, the Romans did it, the Turks did it, the Ottomans did it. Everyone did.
Everybody takes their turn at it.
Right. Although the American empire looks like it's on the verge of collapse. That's how it looks like to me. I feel like the fabric of the country is being held together by just threads. I feel like at any moment it's just going to rip apart. There's just too much tension. Too many people within the country viscerally hate each other. I honestly,
the good news is that they don't all live near each other, so it's a big place. So that may be the saving grace, is that rural America has enough distance from the urban areas that where the universities and all this stuff is far enough away from where people are actually growing food and mining metals and manufacturing stuff, because that's kind of red America, and then the blue America is kind of the white collar work.
I mean, basically, and I've seen maps where essentially they look at by county how they vote, and then you find that essentially, literally, the whole country is red, and then just a few dots, especially at the coastline, tend to be
and it's self-segregating
blue hotspots,
and it's increasingly self-segregating. Right, they are segregating by ideology,
but it pains me to see the division, and especially because I feel like the division is manufactured and engendered by the media, and so I think this is where the resentment towards the Jewish media.
but it's that vulnerability again from being lonely and tired.
So, do you think the fact that the secular Jewish liberal person who feels lonely, having not really established close cultural ties with the homeland, where most people there are Orthodox and right wing, so they come to America and they find that they are living in a country, or at least initially seem to be fairly ethnically homogenous. In my mind, I could see how some people might feel threatened by a strong ethnic homogenous group representation and culture, and would probably feel safer seeing that undermined by downplaying the host culture and propagating.
But again, it's a generational thing.
Listen to me.
Because my father's generation, his dad, they were in love with America. They had no desire to wreck America. So it's my generation that became like that. It wasn't like immigrants.
So you agree that the current generation of secular liberal Jewish people do want to wreck America? I mean, read their articles.
I agree they do. No, I'm just saying that they didn't.
The scourge of whiteness, the problem of whiteness. Whiteness should be eradicated. And it's like, as a white person, I hate being white. And you look at the byline. Wait, isn't that a Jewish person?
So, but their grandparents didn't feel that way when they came to America.
So what is causing
their grateful to be there?
So what is causing their children to hate America so much? And so because
guilt, fear, and feeling like if they stay only within the Jewish community, they have a very narrow pool of friends and lovers and wives and husbands. So they want to be able to connect with, they have a bigger range of people. If they stay just within the Jewish community, they have very narrow choices. Whereas if they can somehow, intermarry with the rest of Americans, they have a lot more options.
Wait a minute. This conversation just took a strange turn, because now if I'm hearing you right, you're suggesting that all of this boils down to the reproductive aspirations of white liberal Jews. It almost seems like you're kidding. Tell me you're kidding.
I wish I was. I'm being honest about how I saw it as a teenager growing up.
Yeah.
I remember my mother and I having a conversation, and she was saying, well, because there's only 3 Jews in my whole high school out of 2,500 kids, and so I said to my mom, look, it's really unlikely.
In L.A.
In LA, in my suburb of LA, right? I grew up near the Reagan, where now is the Reagan Library. So I grew up in a county that's red-ish. Okay. And so my parents, of course, were constantly encouraging me to marry a Jewish woman, and they even tried to set me up a few times, and it didn't work out.
Because there were the pool of choices was so small.
It's just so tiny. So it's like...
So if you went out on 2 dates and you didn't get along, that was it.
I couldn't even get a date with a Christian girl.
With a Christian girl or a Jewish girl?
Christian girls. There was no Jewish girls to date, period. Almost none.
And then the Christians
wouldn't go out with me unless I went with them to church. So I had to go to every different church to have any chance with any of these girls.
A time where girls would say, if you don't go to church with me, I won't date you. It almost seems like a century ago.
I know. I'm that old. No,
and it almost seems, and I'm sure a lot of people watching this would think, wow, the good old days.
And this is the 1970s, 80s.
Wow. Okay, so...
these were the days,
couldn't you just pretend, just go to church for the sake of it?
I did.
Yeah, you did?
I did. That's how I learned so much about different branches of Christianity.
And so you got the girls.
Mormonism. I learned Catholicism.
And you dated the
Methodist.
girls.
Well, kind of, sort of. There's very little possibility of anything happening because in the end, I'm a Jew. And
their parents would know that?
Not approve. I had even my best friends, it's horrible to say, I'm not going to mention names, but his mother was concerned that underneath, I used to have hair, by the way. I had a big Jew fro, and you could actually lose combs in this. Anyways, it's like, you ever seen Billy Joel?
Yes.
Bigger than his hair.
Wow.
Way bigger. Yeah.
Okay.
And he's also Jewish, by the way.
Surprise, surprise.
And so I had people that would run their fingers through my head to see if they could find my horns. My horns. Because
Really?
Jews were satanic.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
This high school?
Yes, this is the 70s and 80s.
That's shocking and sad.
Well, I grew up in a time where there still were KKK people, there still were Nazis, and I went to school with the kids of them. And I had a friend, I've told you about this, one of my friends, he was dating a non-Jew, and they were doing calculus homework together, and her dad was a white supremacist, cracker.
Well, calculus, a Jew boyfriend would come in very handy, wouldn't he?
And so her dad...
And a Chinese.
And her dad was just furious. And he laid siege to my friend's house with his shotgun. And my friend called me up, and he's talking to me. He's like, I don't know what to do. He's terrified, right? And the guy's firing off his shotgun, and you're hearing with his southern drawl, saying just, "Oh, you Jews ain't nothing but niggas turned inside out." And it was a horrifying experience. This was 1981.
So here's what I feel like. I feel like there's room for a conversation, and if only people were willing to acknowledge their biases and their prejudices, their misconceptions, and their obligations to society, I feel like this gap can be bridged. If for example, say native populations or whites or blacks or whatever can come to understand that, look, it's probably not okay, or at least it is not okay for you to discriminate against an entire group of people, treat people as individuals, be more open about it, while at the same time encouraging minority groups in certain populations to understand the potential for tension and to look for some of these potential problem areas, and seek ways of mitigating any of the tension that could arise. I studied in India for university. I studied I was studying an undergraduate course in commerce in India. And we, of course, were a minority. The town I went to was popular, was like a student town. There was a big university with many affiliate colleges. So a lot of African students went to this town. And so when I got to this town, I found that we had a community of Africans and then sub-communities of Ugandans and Kenyans and others, but mostly Ugandans and Kenyans. But Ugandans were the largest group. And when I got to that town, I noticed that there were tensions. There were tensions. The host communities, for example, felt like we were a bad influence on their youth. Why? Because we were students with some cash to blow, so we were drinking a lot and partying a lot and so forth.
You guys were the degenerates.
We were exactly
unraveling the society.
So we were easily scapegoated for the problems that were perceived in the society.
Of course.
So if an Indian girl all of a sudden was acting, I guess not modestly, father would say, yeah, she's trying to copy these African girls. Or if the boys were starting to drink or misbehave, they'd say, oh, they're copying the African boys. And so we sort of became a target for that kind of those sorts of attitudes. And while I would say that it's probably unfair to ascribe, to blame us for those problems, at the same time, I can accept the responsibility that my community has to that community in at least trying to honor their customs and their values, because we are guests and they are hosting us as guests. And we need to act as though we are guests and not as though we own the place so that we can change the place or impose our values on them. And that is the attitude that I had. Now,
the thing that happens is that as the generations pass, what starts off as respectful and even enthusiastic endorsement of the dominant majority culture, like my father and grandfather, they were militant Americans, right? I mean, they would probably kill. I mean, my dad joined the U.S. Navy, so he was ready to kill for America. So
then what happens with the next generation?
So I think the generation that's born after the crisis era doesn't take things as seriously. So my father grew up during the Great Depression, World War II, Holocaust. So his, obviously, he became just a patriotic American. He saw it as the greatest hope of humanity and the greatest place for Jews to have a chance in the world.
Is it kind of similar to how you notice, like a lot of the Western Asians that become terrorists or join terrorist groups, they tend to be the second generation.
Exactly. I was going to bring that up.
Because the first generation Pakistani family or
Dad's
Iraqi,
happy to drive his cab.
They're like, oh my gosh, I am so happy to be in this country. I get to eat 3 meals a day. God bless this country. We're very happy to be here. I can look after my mother back home. We're good. Meanwhile, their son feels no connection to the host country. And
is even embarrassed about dad having an ordinary job.
Right.
And that's a big part of the humiliation that their dad or mom is doing working class labor.
Right.
And they feel just humiliated about it.
And of course, they clearly don't fit into the host country. They're clearly foreigners and will be treated as such. And so they feel like they don't belong anywhere. They feel resentful, and which makes them easy targets for indoctrination and radicalization.
And then why not try to unravel the society? If you don't fit in, rip it apart so you have some way to fit in.
So do you think we've landed on the main issue here?
That second and third generation Jews like myself are a problem. My father and grandfather were loyal Americans and didn't try to do anything that would disrupt America. All they wanted to do was build it. My father became this country doctor for a small town and built the hospital.
So it all stems from a possible lack of identity.
Complacency, spoiled brats, lack of exposure to real suffering. And so we over-dramatize and create our purpose, instead of being grateful. I think it's just a bunch of ungrateful behavior of second and third generation. people, to be very honest. I mean, I think a lot of the Jewish left are just ungrateful that they've lived in America in such a great time, and they don't appreciate that their delight in being transgressive of norms at some point goes too far.
They seem to have no grasp of that.
And they don't think they should have to. So, I mean, it's almost like they've gone in this zone that they have every right to shred every cultural tradition and norm everywhere.
Explain to me why it almost seems like they relish it. You can see them taking great pleasure in it.
This is self-destruction.
Like they write articles saying, in the next 50 years, whites will be a minority. Yay! Whiteness is dying. Yay!
And then they realize
the straight white male is, the era of the straight white male is over. Hooray! Like, what?
A lot of it is almost a form of suicidal ideation. A lot of it's nihilism and self-destruction. Again, I get back to being lonely and exhausted, and so they're and devoid of any sense of higher purpose. So this becomes their higher purpose, to shred what they think is the source of all evil. That America is the worst country that's ever existed, or it's just.
It makes them feel good to see America that way.
It's like pyromaniacs who like to blow things up.
Well, here's the problem, and this is where I agree with Kanye West, is that the pyromaniacs are running the media. Then this is what he refers to as the so-called Jewish media, is that this proliferation of
but it's among blacks too. There's a black liberal elite that also wants to rip up everything. I mean, we saw the rioting. That was, I mean, you could point out that Jews are heavily involved in BLM and Antifa.
I could, yeah, of course, and they ought to take individual responsibility or even collective for those actions. But it's hard not to notice that a lot of those tensions and emotions are stirred by the same media that is owned by the people Kanye was talking about. Like it's not as though if the media was trying to keep things calm and to reassure people that things are fine and that they shouldn't panic, but if the media is constantly, almost seemingly agitating people into taking extreme measures.
Well, if you notice, they actually got into a really weird situation where they were doing both. They were agitating and then in denial that anything was going on. Right?
Yeah.
They kept on saying, mostly peaceful, while things are getting burnt down.
Yeah, there's a famous frame of a CNN newscast where the guy on the scene is saying, "Hey, everything is peaceful here," while standing in front of a burning building.
So I think that's a good symptom of the situation. I mean, and we get back to this question of the American empire, this need to be able to grind down the white working class so that they can tolerate being part of a global division of labor, right? Because that's really what's going on, is that, they're having to compete against cheap labor from China or India or Africa or South America, whether coming to the country or the factories leaving the country. So the poor and low-skilled workers in America, whether they're white, black, Latino, whatever, even I'm sure there's a few Jewish poor uneducated workers. Not all of our people are smart. But, I think there's this general horrible contradiction where you have uneducated or low-skilled people having to compete against third world labor and yet pay first world rent. And I think so that only works if you can grind down the people who'd have the most backbone to stand up to you. And the people who would have the most likely backbone to stand up against it would have been the white working class. And so that's why they demonized the white working class male and present him as a intolerant, dumbass, sexist, homophobe, because it's just easier to demonize him. And, I grew up around these people, and they're not like that. I mean, yeah, we had the guy who held my friend's home, lay siege to it, but he was not typical. I mean, most of these people are good folks, and they're not psychos like that. They're, but they are, faced with with having to be part of this world market, and and the sense that the privileges that America had after winning World War II are slipping away. And so, we are seeing this decline of the U.S. empire and its ability to provide, its working class and middle class the same level of lifestyle for the next generation that had been the case for prior generations. And so that sense of America's decline. Now, it's not just the U.S. facing this. I think the Japanese are facing this. I think the Europeans are realizing that their moment has really slipped quick. They were celebrating the formation of the EU and the Euro, and no sooner did they do that than they're already feeling like they're falling apart and diminishing. So I think among all the great powers, the former colonialists, I think they're all going down. And Russia itself is also going down, and the Ottomans have shrunk down to Turkey, and they're terrified they're going to lose the Kurdish regions next, and the Persian Empire is worried they're going to lose their Kurds and Azeris and Balochi. So all the former empires seem like they're contracting, aside from maybe China. But there is that sense of diminishment, and the mainstream population is terrified. Because they're being nibbled upon by cheap labor from elsewhere. And wow. And look at the situation if you're now a German industrial worker, worked in a steel plant or a chemical factory, and natural gas prices are so high, and solar has gotten so cheap. And now the electrolyzers to make hydrogen from water are getting really cheap. It's going to be much easier to make steel and ammonia in the third world than it will be to do it in Germany. So I think they may end up permanently deindustrialized, and that heavy industry will move to Africa and India, Southeast Asia, Brazil. And so we're at a real inflection point. We're going to see a real collapse of the
How quickly do you think that's going to happen?
The rise of the solar hydrogen paradigm to
the unraveling of the entire global order.
Well, we're watching this, this Ukraine war. Seems like they're talking crazier each day, and each one is psychologically projecting onto the other their own worst nightmares and most diabolical plans. And each one is claiming the other is going to do a radioactive false flag operation.
It's gotten ridiculous at this point.
And I would argue it's happening even among the Jewish community. Even I think in every community, black community. We had Jussie Smollett with his fabricated oppression. I think everybody's now trying to do false flags on each other to try to demonize each other.
When I saw, for example, when Kanye West first made his remarks, and then the next day I saw a photograph that the media was circulating that showed like people presumed to be white nationalists posting banners.
Turned out to be black folks.
Posting banners over bridges and walkways saying Kanye West was right, and then they're doing like the Nazi Roman salute. It just seemed to me to be too contrived. It just must be some, at least to me, as soon as I saw it, I thought this must be some activist groups looking to use the Kanye rant as an opportunity to, I guess, frame the conversation around the issue of anti-Semitism.
Definitely.
And the media, like I didn't see the media even attempt to find out who it is that put up those those
we've had
banners.
This problem even in the Jewish community. We had some Israeli kid that was like posting relentlessly about anti-Semitic attacks. Fake
hoax hate crimes, you could say.
Yeah, and the sad thing is real hate crimes do occur, and they're horrible. And yet these other people are just trying to politicize it.
The funny thing is, many of the legitimate hate crimes occur between minority groups in America.
Yes, of course.
When it comes to, for example, violence against Asians, like almost 90% of the perpetrators are black.
Yes.
And that's not allowed to be discussed. And
I have to take my fair share of the blame of that.
How so?
Because when I was an editor at the Stanford Daily, I thought that we might be contributing to stereotyping black people by noting the race of assailants all the time. And so the hope was that if we stopped noting the race of the assailants and victims, that, you know, we wouldn't be reinforcing stereotypes. That was the dream.
So the idea was...
I think we failed miserably, but that was the dream.
That's funny. So basically you thought by constantly saying or referring to blacks as the perpetrators, that in some way you would be encouraging blacks to see themselves that way, and thus...
Or encouraging white people to be more afraid of black people. And I didn't want to encourage the fear.
Well, I don't know who said it, but the truth shall set you free. I think it's true. It's been true then, and it's true even now.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, like I said, I'm in a period of my life where current Joel is criticizing younger Joel quite often.
Okay, so so when you look at the reaction towards Kanye West's remarks by mainstream media, social media companies, and his business partners, all literally... Basically, what is happening to Kanye West is it would be fair to describe that as a cancellation. He's getting canceled. Right?
Well, they're attempting it. They're failing, right? He's been reinstated on Twitter, and he bought Parler. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure he's going to have a whole bunch of new fans that he never had before.
But which companies are going to cooperate with him, do you think? If Adidas has pulled out, Gap has pulled out, many companies, his talent agency, his lawyers, everyone's pulling out.
I'm sure somebody will see a low price opportunity.
You don't think he's too radioactive, too toxic to touch?
I'm sure somebody, and many somebodies, will go, I can get Kanye West for a bargain basement price now.
Uh-huh.
And so I can get him to endorse my shoes, my stuff, because others won't. So I think he'll still be okay. I don't think he's going to be going homeless and hungry. I feel bad for him that he lost his mom. I feel bad for him that Kim left him and that she is, with this other guy humiliated him. I think that whole emasculation is just horrible. And just it makes me just so sad how these people's lives have become fodder for everybody's imagination and everything. But I mean, they signed up for it to become celebrities.
What do you think about what he said about how it's a Zionist thing? He mentioned how his wife and her boyfriend at the time, Pete Davidson, had sex at a fireplace and announced it to the world, and it's like that. He said that's Zionism. That's the Zionist agenda. Now, to me, that feels anti-Semitic. At least that seemed to be a bit out of left field. Like, where did he even? How does that
this
even?
Would be like, if like a white person was complaining about a black person having sex with their ex-wife, we'd be calling that racism, right? So it's it's similar. I mean, first of all, the whole sexualization of blacks and Jews, right? So this is, where both groups are hypersexualized in the minds of the mainstream, and among whites, Jews are seen as hypersexualized.
Yes,
and so, this is maybe part of that, and that threat of the other ethnic group literally penetrating into your women, so it's that sense of insecurity and emasculation. I'd rather not try to hold Kanye West every word he says, because the guy has enough problems.
Yeah, so the way I like to see it is that there's probably a kernel of truth sprinkled here and there in what he's saying.
Well, there's truth in everything, right?
Right.
In every joke we ever hear, there's truth. We wouldn't be laughing.
But don't you think do you feel like his critics have been proven right by the extreme actions that have been taken against him? Because that's what people are saying on social media. Like in the comments of these articles, you will see people say, yep, these people are just proving him right. The banks don't want to provide him services. All the big companies are pulling out. And they say they never did anything when previously he said things that have annoyed black people. But when he annoys a particular group of people, all of a sudden his life falls apart. And it almost seems to prove his point that there is some sort of collusion involved among this particular group of people who act in their self-interest and come together and will destroy anyone that speaks out against them. It looks like that's what has happened. You don't see it that way?
Oh, I think that's part of the story, definitely. First of all, I mean, look at the situation. Let's look at what Putin is going through with his war. Mm-hmm. He's been very concerned that more Jews are going to leave Russia, right?
Why is he concerned about that?
Well, because Jews are very skilled, and they're like some of the.
Oh, okay. So because of the state of the economy, that they would flee Russia.
Yeah, or just the whole vibe. I mean, right after when the Soviet Union collapsed. Mm-hmm. 1 million Russians moved to Israel.
Just move closer. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So yeah, when the Soviet Union collapsed, 1 million Jews moved to Israel, and they were the engineers and scientists behind the military-industrial complex of Russia, or Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union basically lost half of all of its engineers and scientists to Israel. So a massive brain drain.
It is, yeah.
And I think all these developed countries are concerned. They don't want to lose their human capital, their intellectual capital. Mm-hmm. I mean, U.S. wouldn't want to have Jews get so frightened that they move to Israel. Right? Or Africa, like me. But I mean, if you are running any industry, banking, technology, pharmaceuticals, you name it, I mean, you have Jews in your company that are highly skilled and maybe order of magnitude more skilled than your average
So the
employee.
idea is to constantly default to catering to the
do you want to lose
sentiments
I think in general the US wants to
appease Jews.
Well, I was going to say in general the US wants to absorb as many smart people on the planet as possible. I think they have a predatory immigration policy. They want
the best and brightest from everywhere in the world.
Everywhere on the planet. They want to suck the brains out of Africa.
It's ironic, isn't it? And they do so under the guise of championing diversity while consigning the other countries from which these geniuses are being drained from into a state of poverty and underdevelopment, because who's going to develop us if you're taking all of our brightest people?
This is why I moved here, to reverse the brain drain. But I think in general, the global arms race is heavily based on intellect. And so Jews are overperformers in that. They're not the only ones, but they are, overperformers in many fields. Not every Jew. I mean, we have our share of idiots. But, by the way, just as the Eskimos have 50 words for snow, mm-hmm. for all the different types of snow, in Yiddish, I haven't counted them yet, but we have dozens of words for foolish people, and with such subtle nuances about the nature of their stupidity and foolishness. So I think when I was thinking about this just a few weeks ago,
No wonder you guys make the best comedians.
Yeah, I think so. And we're also very... my mother says we laugh so as not to cry. And so we channel all of our fear and frustration into humor. And I think a lot of great comedians do that. White, black, Jewish. Look at, someone like, Chris Rock or Eddie Murphy. We all, we've heard stories how angry these guys are. Adam Sandler will tell you he's in a state of rage all the damn time. Mm-hmm. So they channel their rage into comedy. And of course, rage usually comes from fear. So, the whole Yoda thing of, fear to hate. And so...
Wait. So you're saying the more fearful you are, the more likely you are to seek solace through humor.
That, or at least that may be one of your ways to try to deal with your fears, to cope, is to try to joke about it. And
wow, that's why I think I've never met a funny Scandinavian.
They're just not afraid enough.
Life is so peaceful.
Well, remember the movie Life is Beautiful? The Italian Jewish guy who just told jokes and invented stories for his son so he wouldn't have to face the horrors of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So I think there's truth to that. There's our fears, our neuroses. If we can put them into comedy, it's a way to cope. Laugh so as not to cry. I think there's even a Baganda Lugero to that effect.
It's interesting how cross culturally we share these same values and sentiments. I quite like that, and which is why I think the best way to create unity and harmony is for people to just talk to each other, and they'll be surprised at how much common ground they share. And I feel like if there are groups of people who have grievances against other groups, I don't feel like that therefore implies that there is animosity. I feel like that implies there's opportunity for conversation. Mm-hmm. So if you're the Tutsi and the Hutu in Rwanda, rather than to shut down any discussion, have them talk about it.
Well, I don't want to touch that issue. I'm a guest in Africa still.
But as an African, I feel like they need to have that conversation. And the fact is, there could be some legitimate grievances.
Well, my rough view on it, I don't know if I should say it. Mm-hmm. Tell me if I'm going to.
No, I mean,
I think in the end, it's similar to what America had happen. It's cowboys versus farmers. I know it sounds bizarre. I mean, I see.
But cowboys are like ranchers, right?
Like the Tutsi. They had cows. And when you lose your cows, you're no longer Tutsi. Right? It wasn't a genetic description. It was a division of labor.
Okay, so essentially, we know that in the 50s, I believe it was the 50s.
59,
59 is where you sort of had the first major exodus of Tutsis into neighboring countries, including Uganda, because of the tensions there. Perhaps, and so rudimentarily, I've seen it said that, this one group seemed to curry favor among the colonists, and so were given privileged positions and so forth, due to probably racist reasons, including, but not limited to, resemblances that were presumed
to be Jewish.
Yeah?
Yeah, I know. So, I mean, it's a sensitive subject.
It's a super sensitive subject. That these guys look a little bit more like us than the other guys. So,
look at my nose.
We feel more comfortable.
So, I mean,
all right. So then the other people got the short end of the stick, and it probably brewed some, conflicts and.
But we have that here too.
Sure.
The tribes here that are cattle ranchers are more successful politically and economically, and I think it's rooted in the economics of livestock raising.
But the thing is, I feel like in Uganda we don't have those same resentments, and I read somewhere we are the most multi-ethnic nation in Africa. Yes. I read. I think we have like 50 plus tribes, and somehow we peacefully coexist. You tend not to see sectarian tension or violence in this country.
Well, not in your lifetime.
But before there was.
Yeah, come on. What, we were going to pretend that the 60s, 70s, and early 80s didn't happen? I mean, there's some really ugly stuff. So.
I know that, but I don't feel like those tensions were generalized across the population.
Well, they were more complex because religion bifurcated several of the tribes, Catholics,
right, and certain
Muslims.
tribes are overrepresented in the army and armed forces and so on and so forth. But I don't like what I'm saying is like the common man on the street or the common woman on the street. I don't think he harbored resentment towards the person of the other ethnicity.
Not generally. I mean, I encounter it because
probably the elites.
I end up seeing some of it. It's okay. There's a degree of stereotyping that people do of other tribes, but is it hatred? I don't think it's hatred.
I find it to be more humorous. It's like if you go on Facebook, it's like we're constantly teasing each other, or Northerners are like this, Baganda are like this,
Exactly.
Basoga are like this, Acholi are like this, and it's more just friendly jibes.
Yeah. Well, in
jibes,
America
you know?
in the 50s and 60s, they would tell jokes about Italians and Polish and Russians and Germans
And I feel like those jokes are intended to, I could say, sort of break the ice. It's like they point to a particular anxiety a group might feel towards another, and again, they use humor to address it.
But if we brought woke Americans here to watch the dynamics between Bantu and Luo, you'd have them screaming about oppression and trying to incite people, because that's just where their heads are at right now.
Wow, okay.
So as here, Uganda's in kind of an opening phase. I think since I came, I may have come on like the day when the closing ended, with the Mabira Forest riot. I feel like the country's just been opening ever since.
I feel that way too. I actually do think there's a good, bright future ahead for this country.
I think so. I think it's a great place. I tell people in the U.S. and Canada that Uganda is kind of where America was in the 70s and 80s, where there's just a big opening. And I've told Europeans, look, I don't want to hear about your complaining about your cold winters. You're going to have 5 or 10 cold winters. Why don't you come here and work remotely in Uganda? It's 27C year round. We got good internet and people are friendly and there's no tribalist hatred going on here. Everybody's dating each other, making babies with each other.
Yeah.
It's a good vibe.
It is.
And I
truly.
came here so I could be part of that good vibe.
That's so great.
I wanted to avoid what I saw was this coming civil discord in America and the potential for world war. And I figured Uganda would be my safe place to hide from all that.
Well, we're going to be watching that destruction of the American cultural
And
fabric
it saddens me
from over here. And I hope you'll be able to join me in more conversations about these
you
types of
name it
things.
Anytime. I find it's great to have such a discussion. It's impossible to have it with most Americans. The people are really quick on the draw. They're ready to shoot first and ask after.
Yeah.
And they assume the worst. And you have to be super careful. Everybody's walking on eggshells. Even Obama commented about how the wokesters have just made the whole situation in the country unbearable.
And I'm glad
when someone like Obama says that.
He's a true statesman. He understands what's happening to his country, and he probably doesn't like what he's seeing.
Well, I mean, like a lot of guys like myself,
and it's costing his party election.
And it's just sad. A lot of us who are traditional liberal, free speech guys, live and let live, agree to disagree. I'll fight for your right to say whatever nonsense you're saying that I would love to bitch slap you for, but I'll still defend your right to say it. And I certainly don't defend the state or big corporations suppressing you. Yeah. That used to be what I thought was the left-wing view. And then I left America, and then everything changed. But I knew
I was your Jon Stewart circa 2003 liberal type person is what I was.
I was when I left. When I moved to Canada, I was.
But Jon Stewart 2022, man, he's
like I said,
he's lost the plot.
I think these people are just lost. They're lonely and tired, and they don't have a purpose. Yeah. They just don't have a purpose, and whether it's midlife crisis for the Gen Xers or if it's the baby boomers seeing the old age.
What
and
about
death coming?
the economics of media, modern media, where it's based on clickbait, clicks, and views, and so there's a predisposition for them to pursue inciting headlines and just
Definitely.
sensational stories.
Definitely. Well, I mean, this whole Kanye West thing is pure sensationalism from everybody, from him,
right. So in
him.
other words, it's like everyone's trying to get their pound of flesh from this story. And so everyone, they're magnifying this to the stratosphere.
We've turned the whole society with TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. Everybody's an attention whore. We've just turned, it's like planet attention whore now.
And as someone I'm more from a legacy media media background, like traditional FM, and now I do online radio. And the challenge you face is you're trying to compete in an economy of virality. So everyone's looking to be the hot viral sensation in that moment. And in order to maintain relevance, you have to continue to be in that viral moment. And it's just unsustainable, and there's just no way you can create anything meaningful.
Well, look at what happened to poor Kevin Samuels.
Yeah.
I mean, that guy heroically tried to wake people up that they were going down roads that were inevitably self-destructive, and he had to keep it going. And he was Red Bulling himself to death so he could keep up.
There was a kind of Red Bull next to him on every video he did,
and we know that stuff dehydrates and causes heart problems.
And of course, he was already middle aged, and who knows what else he was into.
Well, just when you're in a constant state of battle, I mean, your cortisol levels, all your hormones are messed up. And if you're just going to be constantly like that, you're going to be like a soldier with PTSD.
Wow, I better watch it. So that's slow down.
That's the danger of being in controversial mode all the time. It gets you the clicks, it gets you the views, but you are.
But you I look at, like, I follow many American journalists, and honestly, they seem neurotic at this point, like screeching, howling. Crazies is how they strike me.
I think they're trying to prove themselves to their tribe.
A journalist used to be someone that just said, this happened, here's the analysis. But now it's like, yo, guys, the sky is falling. I hate these people. This is evil. We have to stop. Like,
they want final solutions
to every problem.
So basically, you purposely use that word with all due
very,
respect.
very relevant.
I think all sides want final solution. So we have Hitlerians on every side.
But I beg to differ. I take the view that the left has sort of gone off the rocker on this.
They've gone way off.
I feel like just on balance, I feel like they're a bit more on the hysterical side of things.
Well, it doesn't help, though, that there are enough cartoon characters on the right. I mean, that's the problem. And when you have enough idiots that want to dress up in Nazi uniforms and and look like they're Confederates, I mean, it doesn't help. I mean, so
you give them fuel.
Yeah, and even though they're a tiny minority of costumed, supervillains.
Yeah, sure. And I don't look, and it's not that I'd have a problem with them pointing that out or complaining about it or suggesting that it needs to be addressed. But I mean, it literally, these journalists, you follow them on Twitter, like the ones on U.S. cable news.
I can't handle it. I just can't handle
or
watching
Washington
it.
Post, New York Times. I'm telling you, these people just seem like
they're unhinged.
They're unhinged.
And like I said, I mean, they're in a field that's declining, right? Their industry is shrinking by the day.
Yes.
Even the new fangled version of it with Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, all their stocks are in the tank, right? So they're in this rabid competition. So that's the interesting thing. Well, you got Kanye West complaining about the power of Jewish media, and now we have a massive proliferation of citizens' media. So people are able to create whatever the hell they want.
Exactly, and
so it's like the Jewish media is actually irrelevant now. So it's like they talk about this power. Well, they have power over this dinosaur that nobody's watching CNN anymore.
True.
No one's watching MSNBC, and
perhaps
nobody reads the New York Times or Wall Street Journal. So
maybe that ought to be a sufficient response to Kanye. Maybe Kanye should understand that. If he truly believes that there is a Jewish media that intends to subvert his values and his culture and his people, that there is a silver lining to that dark cloud.
And he's already seized it. He bought Parler from
exactly
Candace
that
Owens'
we're moving into a realm in which the so-called Jewish media, if it is a real thing, no longer holds sway over public opinion
Which
and
is
public
why they're
discourse.
screaming so loudly. They're frustrated that they've lost power.
So it's the last kicks of a dying horse.
They've died.
So Kanye West, so rather than taking them on and trying to start fights with them, would rather focus his attention on building his alternative platforms through which he can then be the one to influence culture and influence opinions.
And he already has.
And he
does.
has. Now, I'm curious to see what he will accomplish with his Parler acquisition. Now that Twitter has been bought by Elon Musk, and if Twitter is going to be a free speech space, I wonder how relevant Parler will be, unless he leverages Parler into offering other range of services, maybe music, or I don't know what he might come up with. But the future seems interesting for social media.
Well, certainly this sense that Kanye was conveying of limitation, of constraint, I think that was false. So even if one was to take his allegation of this Jewish stranglehold on expression through the various entities that he's wrestling with, there's just a metastasis of theaters. So it's like there's this. He can't be controlled. No one can be controlled anymore. I mean, we all can. Obviously, they can cancel you in the worst ways by
by deleting you.
Yeah, well, removing you from the financial system.
That's the worst.
That's what they've done to Russia. Now, of course, Russia's found ways to function without it, and India is developing their own fintech industry. I mean, I think now Indian fintech is 15% of global fintech, and so and then Chinese fintech is a whole other avenue. So, and then you got Dabshili for the Somalis. So I mean, it's even that where it would be most brutal to cut people out of the global financial system. The ability of the G7, or I don't know how you want to characterize that, but whoever's trying to NATO or the big banks, they have lost control as well. And so I think we're in a situation where the old power structure is losing its ability to control things.
And I think that would explain the hysterics we're seeing. That could possibly explain some of the instabilities we're seeing economically across nations. So maybe you could say we're in a transition stage from the old...
I think we definitely are. The
old unipolar
died, but the new
global order to now...
The new isn't strong enough to fully reveal itself.
Growing pains. We're getting there.
Yeah. Well, it's just like I use the solar power example because people have not realized how it's been exponentially growing for these last 80 years, and it's really about to just knock everybody on their ass. I mean, it took 80 years to reach the first terawatt of solar panels installed on Earth. That happened early this year. Mm-hmm. Now we're going to reach the second terawatt next year. Mm-hmm. And we will then reach 16 terawatts by 2027, in 5 years. Solar will be larger than natural gas and coal electricity.
Really?
In 5 years, at this rate of speed. That's
encouraging. So environmentalists should be less, deranged and feel happy about the future.
One would hope. But the thing is, I got a lot of people angry at me when I pointed out that this was the inevitable mathematics of the solar exponential growth since 1941. That solar's been doubling every 2 years for 80 years. And I think maybe it's because I'm a biologist. I understand what exponential growth looks like. When you watch bacteria grow on a petri dish, you don't see it for a long time, but it's been doubling and doubling and doubling and doubling, still invisible. And finally it gets visible, and then but it didn't actually speed up. It's the same rate of growth, but it's been doubling the whole damn time. So I think we're about to see solar just slap people upside their face. I kind of suspect Putin launched his war because he knew that the days of oil and gas are numbered, and that he knew he only had 5 or 10 years before his resources wouldn't be worth anything.
Why launch the war then?
Well, because now he can use it as a weapon. He can use oil and gas access
by destabilizing the global supply, and then
exactly
hiking prices, and
you got it, and forcing them to choose. Right? You want to starve? You want to have freezing winter?
Yeah, because what is it? Germany, they're now restarting their coal plants.
And they're chopping down forests. They're waiting in line for firewood now in Scandinavia. No, I mean, they got all kinds of problems going on, and their rivers are low. Like, I think the rivers were low in Britain and in Norway, so their hydro dams barely put out. The French nuclear reactors couldn't even be cooled by their rivers. The rivers have become too warm from the cooling water from the nuclear plants. So it's like they're in a vicious cycle. So that's why they had to turn them off. And then the Rhone River, well, that's for France. The Rhine River for Germany is so low the coal barges can't even flow down it.
What?
So it's like we got serious issues. Now, I don't think it's a climate issue, by the way. People want to say all these droughts and river problems are climate.
What could it be?
It's human consumption. We have more people. We're eating more stuff that uses lots of water. We're manufacturing stuff that uses lots of water. We've drained our lakes, drained our aquifers. And I'm not a Malthusian. I'm not afraid of population. I think it just means we need to get off our ass and desalinate. You got to manufacture fresh water and pump it back up. The Israelis just did this. They're desalinating water off their coast, and they set up a pipe and they refilled the Sea of Galilee so that the Jordan River can flow again. And so I think we're going to see that all over the world. Where you have
That's amazing.
And then the great thing is after you desalinate, you get this really salty water, which has lithium in it and other metals. So now you can take that water and use it to make batteries.
Wow.
So, so a lot of interesting stuff's about to happen, and people are not ready for it at all. And they're fighting over wars that happened 150 years ago. And
it's so unfortunate that there's so many reasons to be happy for the future and optimistic, and yet we're here squabbling over seemingly petty grievances over really nothing. And so it's unfortunate that Kanye West has acted in ways that seem to now have compromised his commercial viability. Apparently, he lost $2 billion worth of his net worth, just vanished this past week. But I do suspect that he'll be able to make a comeback. Don't forget, 5 years ago, he was $50 million in debt. And then surprisingly, he then within 5 years was making $150 million a year to become now worth so many millions or billions. So don't underestimate Kanye. I think he's going to make a great comeback. Well, I want to thank you so much, Joel.
My pleasure.
For being with us here today on this conversation. I mean, this is the first time we're having a conversation. I didn't know what shape it was going to take. We don't really even have a name for this kind of conversation, but I think it was a great first, and I look forward to having more conversations with you about other, issues of cultural, geopolitical importance, and many other things. So I hope to see you again very soon.
I love doing this. This is fun. This is why I moved here. So I could be here a kilometer above all these other places and their petty bullshit, and we can ponder things at a higher level from our safe distance.
This is great. This is the kind of conversation. If you're a viewer from Uganda, obviously you'll know that these aren't things I've discussed widely on radio because maybe it's not something that would resonate with a lot of people, or even that they would be interested in it. But I'm sure you could be the kind of person that's interested in these issues, these geopolitical and the global cultural issues. And who knows, between Joel and I, hopefully we'll be able to explore many of these issues. If you're watching us and you're from outside Uganda, maybe you're American or Western person, I hope you don't mind that this foreigner from Africa is sharing his opinions on things that are happening in your corner of the world. But how can you blame me? What happens in your side of the planet affects things here.
Oh, a hell of a lot more. And I want to say to Africans, I hope you don't mind me being an immigrant spouting off about things here. Yeah. But and actually, this asymmetry of how things going on there impact us here versus what goes on here doesn't impact them very much.
Yeah,
like when the Rwandan genocide happened, Americans barely noticed it.
Right.
And versus, this Ukraine-Russia war, this is really the elephants stampeding on the grass, and we're the grass.
We are.
And so it's like I feel it so differently now.
So these American political debates are things that interest us now in the third world.
It
So
does.
now we follow these conversations.
And I'm watching Africans try to navigate it and try to make sense out of it. And Uganda's in a very different mindset right now. Like I said, much more like America in the 70s and 80s, more open-minded every day. Ugandans seem to become more and more open-minded, more and more curious, and while the Americans are becoming ever more narrow-minded. And
the table is flipping.
It really is.
I find that interesting.
And like I said, if the solar revolution continues like this,
I think the people with the most sunshine will be the ones on top. I mean, we would be an energy powerhouse, wouldn't we? Exactly. Exporting solar energy to other parts of the world.
Industrializing, building our chemical industry and fertilizer and steel.
That'll be great.
It's going to be amazing. And in fact, I say to the Americans and Europeans that are anxious about their deindustrialization or all the other fears they have, I go, come spend your winter here.
Come here. It's all here.
Start over.
Yeah.
Have a new chapter of your life. Get fit. It's great weather. People are fit and young and optimistic here. It's just, it would be much better for your mental health. Leave the depressing, hyperventilating, over dramatization,
and get off Twitter.
I participate on Twitter, but I try not to get drawn into the venom.
Okay. And it can get quite poisonous over there.
And it just seems really pointless.
I know, right? But I think long-form conversations are the way to go, where you can parse through the nuances of all of these very complicated issues. And you will come to find that a lot of these issues aren't as complicated as you might be led to believe. And we can essentially figure out a way forward and for everyone to be happy and look forward to a bright future. Joel, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Join us again very soon. See you on the next one.
Wangala okula kula ne. And boot my bed, and I can keep on going. I got 20 of them.
Well, I don't know what we'll talk about next, but I guess we will communicate it and see how it goes next time. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you, James.